Chapter 1. The Surveillance Nightmare. That's already here. Picture this terrifying scenario. You're driving through your own neighborhood after a long day at work, maybe running 5 mph over the speed limit like 85% of American drivers do every single day. You're thinking about dinner, your kids' homework, or tomorrow's meetings. 2 weeks later, a letter arrives that will change your life forever. It's not from the police. It's not from the city. It's from your own HOA. A $125 fine with your license plate photo attached, demanding payment within 30 days. But here's where. This story becomes a full-blown nightmare. If you don't pay that fine, your HOA can place a lien on your home, charge you additional fees and interest, and eventually foreclose on your property. You could literally lose everything you've worked for over a speeding ticket issued by your neighbors. This isn't some dystopian fiction from a Black Mirror episode. This isn't a preview of some authoritarian future. This is happening right now, in Florida, and it's spreading like a virus to HOA communities across America. Welcome to the new reality where private corporations have acquired more power to monitor, punish, and destroy your life than government agencies ever dreamed of possessing. The most shocking part? It's completely legal. While you were focused on government overreach and constitutional rights, private HOAs were quietly building a surveillance state in your backyard that operates without constitutional protections, due process rights, or democratic oversight. They've created a system where corporate entities can watch your every move, fine you for minor infractions, and ultimately seize your home, all while claiming it's for community safety. Chapter 2. Welcome to the Panopticon subdivision. Sarasota's Laurel Oak Estates looks like every American's dream neighborhood. Pristine lawns stretch between elegant homes worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Tree-lined streets wind through a community where successful professionals have invested their life savings in pursuit of the American dream. Children ride bikes on quiet sidewalks while parents walk dogs past perfectly maintained landscaping. But hidden throughout this seemingly peaceful paradise is a network of surveillance technology that would make authoritarian governments jealous. Speed cameras disguised as traffic safety equipment monitor every vehicle movement. License plate readers capture and store data on every car that enters or exits. Motion sensors and monitoring devices track patterns of daily life with algorithmic precision. The HOA has partnered with Traffic Logics, a surveillance company that's aggressively marketing these systems to private communities across America. Their sales pitch is seductive. Cut speeding and generate revenue for other HOA programs. That last part should send chills down every American's spine. They're openly admitting this is about profit, not safety. But Traffic Logics isn't alone. Companies like Flock Safety, OpenALPR, and dozens of smaller firms are rushing to capitalize on the HOA surveillance boom. They're selling comprehensive monitoring packages that promise to solve every community problem through automated enforcement and continuous surveillance. The message is clear. Human judgment, community cooperation, and basic trust are obsolete. Corporate algorithms will manage your neighborhood more efficiently than neighbors ever could. These systems work with terrifying efficiency. Advanced cameras detect your vehicle's speed within a fraction of a mile per hour. License plate recognition. Software instantly identifies your vehicle and cross-references it with HOA databases. Automated systems generate citations, calculate fines, and mail penalties to registered owners without any human oversight or judgment calls. One unfortunate driver was recorded doing 39 mph in a 25 mph zone, just 14 mph over the limit on what appears to be a wide, well-maintained residential street. Weeks later, a $125 citation appeared in their mailbox like a bill from a corporate creditor. No warning, no opportunity to explain circumstances, no human consideration of context, just automated corporate punishment delivered with the efficiency of a utility bill. Think about that for a moment. In most American communities, police officers wouldn't even pull you over for 39 in a 25. It's the kind of minor speed variance that happens when you're distracted by a phone call, looking for an address, or simply not watching your speedometer with obsessive precision. But in HOA surveillance communities, this becomes a $125 fine that could eventually cost you your home. Chapter 3. The legal loophole that destroyed American rights. Here's the most shocking revelation that will fundamentally change how you understand property rights in America. Everything these HOA surveillance systems do is completely legal. Law enforcement in Sarasota County has explicitly stated that the practice is allowed because HOA streets are considered private property. These are civil matters between the vehicle owner and the HOA, said Sarasota Sheriff's Office spokesperson Dana Judge, in a statement that essentially hands over police powers to private corporations. With those words, she acknowledged that HOAs now operate their own parallel justice systems that exist outside constitutional protections and democratic oversight. This legal framework reveals the most dangerous transformation in American property rights since the abolition of feudalism. Private corporations can now exercise governmental powers, surveillance, law enforcement, punishment, and property seizure, without the constitutional limitations that restrict actual government agencies. Your HOA can do things to you that would be completely illegal if done by police, courts, or city officials. Consider the constitutional violations that HOAs commit routinely: unreasonable searches through constant surveillance, punishment without due process, seizure of property without judicial oversight, and enforcement actions that would require warrants if conducted by government agencies. But because HOAs are technically private entities, constitutional protections simply don't apply. The fines themselves reveal the arbitrary nature of corporate justice. They start at $125 for minor speed violations, but jump to $200 if you're clocked at 41 mph or higher in a 25 mph zone. These penalty amounts aren't based on scientific safety analysis or democratic input from residents. They're calculated to maximize revenue while staying below the threshold that might motivate serious legal challenges. But here's where the system becomes truly dystopian. Failing to pay these fines doesn't just result in additional penalties. Your HOA can restrict your access to your own community, essentially banning you from your own neighborhood. They can place liens on your property that damage your credit and prevent refinancing or selling. Most shocking of all, they can ultimately foreclose on your home to recover debts that started with minor traffic violations. Think about that terrifying progression. A moment of inattention while driving through your own neighborhood can escalate through automated corporate systems to losing everything you've worked to build. There's no appeals court, no jury of your peers, no constitutional protections, just a private corporation with the legal authority to destroy your life over infractions that wouldn't even merit police attention in normal communities. The legal precedent this creates is staggering. If HOAs can use surveillance technology to monitor and fine traffic violations, what prevents them from expanding to monitor noise levels, visitor patterns, personal behavior, or political activities? The infrastructure for comprehensive surveillance is already in place. All that's required is HOA board votes to expand enforcement parameters. Chapter 4. The Corporate Surveillance Gold Rush. Laurel Oak Estates isn't an isolated experiment. It's the tip of an iceberg that's spreading across American communities with alarming speed. Other neighborhoods in the Sarasota area, including the Landings in Rosedale in East Manatee County, have already installed similar surveillance systems. Traffic Logics and competing companies are aggressively marketing this technology to HOA boards nationwide, promising both safety improvements and profitable revenue streams. The business model is ingeniously predatory. Companies like Traffic Logics don't just sell equipment. They provide comprehensive community safety solutions that include installation, monitoring, enforcement, and collection services. They handle everything from camera calibration to mailing fines to pursuing legal action against non-paying residents. HOAs get automated revenue streams while outsourcing the dirty work of surveillance and punishment to corporate specialists. These companies are actively recruiting residents to become surveillance advocates within their own communities. Traffic. Logix encourages homeowners to pitch the technology to their HOA boards, providing sales materials and persuasive arguments about safety benefits and revenue generation. They're essentially turning neighbors into corporate sales representatives who convince their communities to install surveillance systems that will monitor and fine them. The revenue potential is staggering and reveals the true motivation behind these systems. A single speed camera in a busy HOA community can generate tens of thousands of dollars annually in fines. Multiply that by multiple cameras throughout a development, add license plate readers that can detect parking violations and unauthorized visitors, and you're looking at revenue streams that can significantly reduce or eliminate traditional HOA fees. This creates perverse incentives that prioritize profit over genuine safety. HOAs discover they can use surveillance technology to create steady income from their own residents, encouraging them to set speed limits artificially low, calibrate cameras for maximum violation detection, and expand enforcement to cover increasingly minor infractions. Every violation becomes profit. Every resident becomes a potential revenue source. Companies like Logix claim that speeds can drop by up to 91% within 3 months of installation, but these statistics are misleading and potentially manipulated. When speed limits are set artificially low and cameras are calibrated to detect minor violations, dramatic improvements are inevitable regardless of actual safety benefits. More importantly, the companies have financial incentives to exaggerate effectiveness while downplaying privacy and civil rights concerns. The surveillance expansion isn't limited to speed enforcement. The same companies sell comprehensive monitoring, packages that include noise detection, parking enforcement, visitor tracking, and behavioral analysis. Once the surveillance infrastructure is installed and residents become accustomed to automated enforcement, expanding to additional monitoring becomes a simple software update rather than a major policy change. Subscribe if this corporate surveillance expansion is shocking you. Wait until you see the privacy nightmare that's already here. Chapter 5. The Privacy Apocalypse in Your Driveway. The privacy implications of HOA surveillance systems extend far beyond speeding fines and represent nothing less than the complete elimination of anonymity and freedom of movement in American residential communities. License plate readers don't just capture violations. They create comprehensive databases of every vehicle movement, building detailed profiles of where residents and visitors go, when they travel, and who they associate with. When you know where a person's been, you know all about them, said Adam Schwartz of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, in a statement that understates the true scope of surveillance capabilities. Modern license plate recognition systems can track your movements with precision that would make intelligence agencies envious, recording not just where you go, but how long you stay, how often you visit certain locations, and patterns of behavior that reveal intimate details about your private life. Consider what this surveillance reveals about your personal life. Every time you visit a doctor, your HOA's systems can record the date, time, and duration of your visit. Political meetings, religious services, therapy appointments, legal consultations, romantic relationships, all of this becomes data in corporate databases that exist without oversight or protection. The American Civil Liberties Union of Florida has addressed these concerns directly. The tracking of people's location constitutes a significant invasion of privacy, but their warnings are being ignored by HOA boards seduced by promises of safety and revenue. Residents are unknowingly trading their fundamental privacy rights for the illusion of security and the promise of lower HOA fees. But the privacy violations go far deeper than simple location tracking. Modern surveillance systems use artificial intelligence to analyze behavioral patterns, identify unusual activities, and flag suspicious behavior for human review. Your HOA's algorithms are learning your daily routines, identifying your normal, patterns, and alerting management when you deviate from expected behavior. This data doesn't remain isolated in HOA computers. It's shared with surveillance companies, stored in corporate cloud systems, and potentially sold to third-party data brokers who package location information for marketing and other commercial purposes. Your daily movements through your own neighborhood become commodities in a surveillance economy that treats privacy as something to be bought and sold rather than a fundamental right to be protected. The long-term implications are terrifying. Children growing up in these surveilled communities are being conditioned to accept constant monitoring as normal and natural. They're learning that privacy is a privilege that can be revoked by corporate decision-makers rather than a right that defines human dignity. We're raising a generation that will accept comprehensive surveillance because they've never experienced anything else. Privacy advocates warn that once surveillance infrastructure is installed, expanding its scope becomes inevitable. Today's speed cameras become tomorrow's facial recognition systems. Today's license plate readers become tomorrow's behavioral analysis networks. Today's traffic enforcement becomes tomorrow's comprehensive social monitoring that tracks political activities, personal relationships, and private behavior. Chapter 6. More power than police, less accountability than dictators. The most disturbing aspect of HOA surveillance expansion is how it reveals that private corporations now possess enforcement powers that exceed those of actual law enforcement agencies, while operating with less accountability than most authoritarian governments. This represents a fundamental inversion of American principles of justice, due process, and democratic governance. When police officers want to issue speeding tickets, they must follow strict constitutional procedures. They need reasonable suspicion. To initiate traffic stops, must inform drivers of their rights and are required to provide opportunities for drivers to contest citations in court. Officers undergo extensive training on constitutional law, civil rights, and proper enforcement procedures. Their actions are subject to review by supervisors, internal affairs investigations, and civilian oversight boards. Police departments operate under public records laws that allow citizens to review enforcement policies, complaint procedures, and disciplinary actions. Officers can be held personally liable for constitutional violations, and departments face federal oversight when patterns of abuse are identified. The entire system is designed with checks and balances that protect individual rights while enabling legitimate law enforcement. HOAs have none of these protections or limitations. They can install surveillance systems without resident approval, set speed limits without traffic engineering studies, and issue fines without constitutional protections. There's no requirement for officer training, no oversight of enforcement procedures, and no appeals process that provides meaningful due process rights. Most shocking of all, police departments can't seize your home for unpaid speeding tickets, but HOAs can. The legal framework that enables HOA foreclosures for unpaid fines creates a system where private corporations have more power over your property than government agencies that are constitutionally limited in their enforcement authority. Consider the absurdity. If a police officer issued you a $125 speeding ticket and you refused to pay, the worst consequences would be additional fines, possible license suspension, or in extreme cases, a brief jail stay. But if your HOA issues an identical fine for an identical violation and you refuse to pay, they can literally take your house. Private corporations have acquired property seizure powers that exceed those of law enforcement agencies. HOA attorney Scott Peterson acknowledges the privacy concerns while defending surveillance systems as helping prevent accidents and protect communities from liability. But his admission reveals the fundamental problem. Even HOA lawyers recognize the constitutional violations while supporting the systems anyway because they generate revenue and reduce corporate liability. The accountability gap is staggering. When police make mistakes, citizens can file complaints, contact elected officials, or pursue federal civil rights lawsuits. When HOAs make mistakes, Residents have limited recourse beyond expensive private litigation that most homeowners can't afford. HOA boards operate in secret, make decisions without public input, and answer primarily to management companies that profit from enforcement actions. This creates a system where private corporations exercise governmental power without governmental accountability, constitutional limitations, or democratic oversight. It's the worst of both worlds: corporate efficiency in violating rights combined with governmental power to destroy lives. Chapter 7. The slippery slope to total surveillance control. Once HOAs install speed cameras and license plate readers, the expansion to comprehensive surveillance becomes inevitable through a process that privacy experts call surveillance creep. The gradual normalization of monitoring that starts with reasonable safety concerns and evolves into total behavioral control. The same technological infrastructure that monitors traffic violations can be easily reprogrammed to enforce any HOA rule imaginable. Parking violations, noise complaints, visitor restrictions, architectural violations, landscaping requirements, all of these can be monitored and enforced through automated systems that require no human judgment or community input. Imagine receiving automated fines for parking slightly over property lines, detected by the same cameras that currently monitor speeding. Picture getting citations for having guests stay too long, identified by license plate readers that track visitor duration. Consider automated noise violations triggered by sound sensors that detect children playing too loudly or dogs barking. Beyond algorithmic limits, the technology companies marketing these systems to HOAs are already developing these expanded capabilities. Flock Safety offers comprehensive community safety solutions that include facial recognition, behavioral analysis, and predictive policing algorithms adapted for residential use. They promise to identify suspicious activities, track unusual behavior patterns, and alert management to potential problems before they occur. But who defines suspicious or unusual in these algorithmic systems? Corporate programmers who've never lived in your community and don't understand local customs, family dynamics, or cultural differences. Artificial intelligence systems trained on data from other communities that may have completely different demographics, values, and social norms. These systems learn from enforcement patterns and resident behavior to identify anomalies that may indicate problems. If you typically leave for work at 8 a.m. but start leaving at 7:30, algorithms flag this as unusual. If you have more visitors than average, systems identify this as suspicious. If your teenagers stay out later than neighbors' children, this becomes a data point suggesting potential rule violations. The expansion beyond traffic enforcement is already beginning. Some HOAs are using the same surveillance infrastructure to monitor architectural violations, identifying roof colors that don't match approved palettes, landscaping that violates design guidelines, and home modifications that weren't properly approved. Artificial intelligence systems can detect these violations faster and more consistently than human inspectors. Others are expanding to behavioral monitoring that tracks resident activities and identifies potential rule violations before they occur. Systems that analyze garbage pickup patterns to identify residents who might be violating recycling requirements. Algorithms that monitor parking patterns to predict which residents might exceed visitor limits. Behavioral analysis that identifies households with excessive noise levels or unusual activity patterns. The normalization process is already underway. Residents who initially objected to traffic cameras gradually accept them as part of community life. Children growing up with surveillance assume monitoring is normal and natural. New residents moving into surveilled communities don't remember what life was like without constant monitoring. Chapter 8. The nationwide revolt against HOA surveillance tyranny. The good news is that lawmakers across America are finally waking up to the HOA abuse crisis and fighting back with legislation designed to protect homeowners from corporate surveillance and enforcement overreach. The expansion of surveillance systems in communities like Laurel Oak Estates is happening just as state governments are recognizing the threat that HOAs pose to fundamental American rights. Minnesota lawmakers have introduced comprehensive HOA reform bills that would require boards to create transparent schedules of fines and fees, ensure homeowners can contest any penalties through fair appeals processes, provide reasonable time periods to correct alleged violations, and outlaw the practice of charging residents for asking basic questions about their own community finances and operations. These reforms directly address surveillance overreach by requiring HOAs to justify enforcement actions, provide due process, protections, and operate with transparency that makes abuse more difficult to hide. If adopted nationwide, such reforms could prevent the automated surveillance systems from operating without resident oversight and democratic input. Arizona is cracking down on HOA budgets with strict new guidelines for how boards can approve expenses, including surveillance system installations. Under proposed legislation, HOA boards would need explicit resident approval for major surveillance investments and would be required to demonstrate genuine safety benefits rather than simply revenue generation potential. Florida, despite being the epicenter of surveillance expansion, has actually passed some of the strongest HOA reform legislation in the country. Recent bills restrict the amount of control HOAs can exercise over residents' property, stop HOAs from issuing fines for minor infractions like leaving trash cans out or holiday lights up, and require greater transparency in enforcement procedures. Georgia has introduced bipartisan bills specifically designed to rein in overly aggressive HOAs and protect homeowners from corporate overreach. These reforms include restrictions on surveillance systems, requirements for resident approval of monitoring technologies, and enhanced appeals processes for residents facing fines or other penalties. California's new legislation requires HOA elections to be independently monitored and mandates that boards comply with homeowner requests for information about surveillance systems, enforcement procedures, and data sharing arrangements. This transparency requirement makes it much harder for HOAs to install comprehensive monitoring without resident knowledge and consent. Colorado has implemented new rules requiring greater transparency between HOA boards and residents, including disclosure requirements for surveillance partnerships, data sharing agreements, and revenue generation from enforcement activities. These reforms help residents understand exactly how their communities are being monitored and what happens to their personal data. The Federal Fair Housing Act is being interpreted more broadly to include surveillance systems that create disparate impacts on protected classes, potentially making discriminatory enforcement through automated systems a federal civil rights violation. This could provide powerful legal tools for residents fighting surveillance overreach. But legislative reform faces powerful opposition from the HOA industry, surveillance companies, and property management firms that profit from current systems. These corporate interests are lobbying against reform efforts and working to expand surveillance capabilities before restrictions can be implemented. Chapter 9: The Human Wreckage of Automated Corporate Justice. Behind every automated fine, surveillance system, and foreclosure threat are real families facing devastating consequences for minor infractions that previous generations would have handled through neighborly conversation and community cooperation. The $125 fines that surveillance systems generate might seem insignificant to wealthy residents, but they can be financially devastating for working families already struggling with inflation, housing costs, and economic uncertainty. Consider Sarah Martinez, name changed for privacy, a single mother working 2 part-time jobs to support her 3 children in an HOA community similar to Laurel Oak Estates. When she received a $125 speeding fine for doing 32 mph in a 25 mph zone while rushing to pick up her daughter from daycare, the fine represented a significant portion of her weekly grocery budget. Sarah couldn't afford to pay immediately and requested a payment plan from her HOA. The management company offered to waive late fees if she paid within 2 weeks, but Sarah couldn't manage even that. The unpaid fine generated additional administrative fees, interest charges, and collection costs that eventually totaled over $400. When she still couldn't pay, the HOA placed a lien on her property that prevented her from refinancing her mortgage. When interest rates dropped, the psychological impact on families living under constant surveillance is profound and largely unmeasured. Parents modify their driving behavior obsessively, constantly checking speedometers and feeling anxious about every trip through their own neighborhoods. Children learn that their daily activities are monitored and recorded, conditioning them to accept surveillance as normal and natural. The threat of liens and foreclosure over unpaid traffic fines creates chronic stress for residents who can never be completely certain they're following every rule perfectly. Families avoid certain routes through their own communities, limit visitor stays to avoid parking violations, and live in constant fear of automated systems that could generate life-changing penalties for minor mistakes. Community relationships suffer dramatically when surveillance systems replace human interaction and judgment. Instead of neighbors talking to each other about driving safely or parking considerately, residents report each other to automated systems that issue corporate fines. The social fabric that makes communities livable is being destroyed by technology that treats every interaction as a potential enforcement opportunity. Dr. Patricia Williams, a sociologist studying the impact of surveillance on residential communities, has documented significant increases in anxiety, depression, and social isolation in heavily monitored HOA developments. People stop trusting their neighbors when they know everything they do is being recorded and could be used against them, she explains. Community cooperation gets replaced by corporate compliance. The impact on children is particularly troubling. Kids growing up in surveilled communities learn that privacy is not a right, but a privilege that can be revoked by corporate decision-makers. They're being conditioned to accept constant monitoring as normal, preparing them for a future where surveillance is ubiquitous and resistance is futile. Elderly residents on fixed incomes are especially vulnerable to the financial impacts of automated fines. For seniors living on Social Security and small pensions, a $125 speeding fine can mean choosing between medications and HOA compliance. Many elderly residents have been forced to sell their homes and move to less expensive areas after accumulating HOA fines they couldn't afford to pay. Chapter 10. The choice that will define America's future. The expansion of HOA surveillance systems represents more than a property management trend or technology adoption. It's a fundamental choice about what kind of country America wants to be and what kind of communities we want our children to inherit. The residents driving through Laurel Oak Estates under the watchful eyes of corporate cameras are living in a preview of one possible American future. This future is characterized by the complete elimination of privacy in residential communities, where every movement is monitored, recorded, and potentially monetized by corporate entities that answer to shareholders rather than residents. It's a future where community cooperation is replaced by automated enforcement, where neighborly conversation is supplanted by algorithmic punishment, and where the basic human right to privacy is treated as an obstacle to corporate efficiency. The surveillance infrastructure being installed in HOA communities today will be extremely difficult to remove once residents become accustomed to its presence and HOAs become dependent on the revenue it generates. Technology companies understand this and are rushing to install systems before public awareness of their implications becomes widespread enough to generate effective resistance. Companies like TrafficLogix are betting that Americans will trade their privacy and freedom for promises of safety and property values that may never materialize. They're counting on residents being too busy, too trusting, or too intimidated by corporate authority to resist surveillance expansion until it becomes so normalized that opposition seems futile. But there's still time to choose a different path. Communities across America are rejecting surveillance solutions in favor of approaches that respect both safety and privacy. Residents are demanding transparency and accountability from HOA boards considering surveillance installations. Lawmakers are strengthening protections for homeowner rights and limiting corporate surveillance authority. The alternative future emphasizes community cooperation over corporate control, human judgment over algorithmic enforcement, and democratic governance over technocratic management. This future recognizes that genuine community safety comes from neighbors who know and trust each other, not from corporate systems that monitor and punish them. The choice isn't between safety and freedom, it's between surveillance systems that create the illusion of security while destroying community trust, and human-centered approaches that build genuine safety through cooperation and mutual respect. The evidence from communities that have rejected surveillance solutions shows that human-based approaches are often more effective at creating genuine safety while preserving the social fabric that makes neighborhoods livable. The story of HOA speed cameras and surveillance systems isn't just about $125 fines, license plate readers, or even the threat of losing your home over minor traffic violations. It's about the most fundamental question facing American communities. Will we allow private corporations to build surveillance states in our neighborhoods, or will we fight for communities based on cooperation, privacy, and human dignity? The residents of Laurel Oak Estates driving under corporate surveillance cameras every day are unwitting test subjects in a massive experiment to determine how much monitoring and control Americans will accept in exchange for promises of safety and order. The results of this experiment will determine whether surveillance becomes normalized in residential communities nationwide, or whether we choose to preserve the privacy and freedom that previous generations fought to establish. Every automated fine mailed to a resident's home represents a small victory for corporate surveillance and a small defeat for human autonomy. Every license plate scan adds another data point to corporate databases that know more about residents' daily lives than family members do. Every foreclosure threat over unpaid traffic fines demonstrates the awesome power that private corporations have acquired over American families. But every community that rejects surveillance solutions strikes a blow for privacy and freedom. Every resident who demands accountability from their HOA board helps preserve democratic governance. Every lawmaker who strengthens homeowner protections helps ensure that corporate power remains limited by human rights. The surveillance infrastructure being installed in American neighborhoods today will determine what kind of country we become. Will we accept the corporate surveillance state being built around us? Or will we fight for communities where privacy is protected, where neighbors trust each other, and where technology serves human flourishing rather than corporate profit? The cameras are watching. The license plate readers are recording. The algorithms are learning. The corporations are profiting. The question that will define America's future is simple. Are you watching them back? Your answer to that question will determine whether your children grow up in communities based on trust and cooperation, or surveillance states where every action is monitored and every mistake is monetized. The choice is still yours, but time is running out to make it. Subscribe to our channel and share this investigation with everyone you know. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our exposés of corporate overreach in American communities. Comment below if your HOA has installed surveillance systems. Your story could help save other families from this nightmare. Like this video if you're shocked by these surveillance revelations. Share with your friends and family. They need to see what's happening in neighborhoods across America before it's too late. Comment. Has your HOA installed speed cameras or surveillance systems? Are you being watched in your own neighborhood? Tell us your story.